Hi, I'm Sam. This is an accessibility talk, so I thought it would be appropriate to have subtitles. They are provided by Google. It's going to struggle with the Australian accent sometimes, but we'll give it a go. I am not an accessibility expert. I am just a guy who writes a lot of code, and it's typically very back-end code. I've been to a bunch of conferences, and I've heard a lot of accessibility talks, and I really do care, but a lot of the stuff that gets discussed doesn't apply to me. So I kind of started looking into the things that do apply to me and trying to figure out how I can do that better. So first off, let's kind of get a baseline. What is accessibility? A lot of people will tell you it's all about using semantic HTML. It does help. A lot of people will talk to you about color contrast, which also that comes into making accessible interfaces. People will tell you it's about using CSS and ARIA tags and all of these things, alt tags, to add more context to the stuff in your HTML. They all help when you are trying to make your app more accessible. But for me, accessibility is about making allowances for people who have different needs to us. So there's a whole bunch of different reasons that you might want to make allowances. Maybe it's because you run a large company and you're afraid you're going to get sued if someone can't use your website. Or maybe it's because, you realize people with different needs also need the thing you're selling. And money's money, it doesn't matter who it comes from. So, isn't accessibility for users? This is the next thing, that when you're talking about accessibility on the back end, you go, well, is accessibility for users? Not all users are users. A user is someone who interacts with your software, interacts with your application. So obviously you've got your customers, they're the ones who bring money into your company. So you want to make sure that your software is accessible for your current customers and for future customers. You're also going to have a bunch of internal staff, so non-technical staff, customer service reps, accountants. They also are very important for taking money from your customers so that your company can keep surviving. They also have to use your software, so you should probably think about making accommodations for them in your back-end tooling, all of that type of stuff. Search engines. Search engines, they are also users of your system. If they can't understand what your website's about, then your search ranking is going to be terrible. And Google in particular does penalize inaccessible websites. Third-party developers, they bring you customers. They bring you their customers. So this is if you're running an API, if you're running any type of external service which other people have to interact with, the developers themselves are also users of your software, and you need to make allowances to make their life easier. Which is getting closer to what this talk's about. And the first-party developers, the people who write your software, the people who are working in there, even if they never click a button on the interface, they are using your code to do their job. They are users of your software. Even if they never touch the interface, the fact that they are interacting with part of your software, which is the back end, which is the code, you have to start thinking a little bit maybe about how do we make our software more accessible for them. then you'll start asking, well, why should we make allowances for developers? I mean, no one on our team is disabled. Not with that attitude. Disabled developers can figure out their own tools. I hear this one a lot. They can make their own allowances, which is not a very good argument. And there's always going to be situations where people won't be able to use their own tools. Within the last year, I can't count the number of times when I've had to SSH into a server while I'm out on my phone and try to fix something. I don't have my IDE on my phone. I have an SSH client and a tiny little keyboard and Vim, and I don't have access to all of my tools. If you've got to go into an external server, even if you're using Vim, you won't have all of your doc files on every single server. You don't always have access to all of your tools. So just going, oh, they can figure it out, that's a really, really terrible take to have. This is a big one that you get when you talk about front-end accessibility. People go, oh, it's going to make our code base more ugly if we start making allowances. I don't know if you've ever looked at code. Even the most beautiful, pretty code is just lines of text. Sometimes there's pretty colors, but code's ugly. Don't have time to do anything about it. We're just trying to ship. Yeah, we're a hustle mindset, and you're making it actively harder for people to do their job, which makes it harder to ship stuff if you're not taking into account the way developers work and trying to make, just some allowances in your code, in your processes, everything else, making allowances so that they can be more productive, kind of helps them do their job quicker and helps you to ship quicker. And this is a big one, especially on the front end. People go, well, standards are confusing and really hard to follow. So let's look at the standards. On the front end, obviously, we know there's a couple of big ones. There's WCAG, which is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are the big ones that most people know about. And this is for interfaces which people have to consume content through. It's so things like this is where your semantic HTML and your all of your color contrast and all of that type of stuff comes in. It's for people to be able to access and consume your content. On the other side of that, the one that not many people know about is ATAG, the Authoring Tool Accessibility Guidelines. So this is when you're creating a tool to create content or to author content, there's another set of guidelines which can be applied to, CMS editors. Technically, even if you have a comment field, that's authoring content. You should maybe look at that, make some allowances. So that's on the front end, and on the back end we have the I think there's WordPress, maybe. So it's weird to bring up WordPress at a Laravel conference, but WordPress, out of everywhere I've looked, is the only published standards which explicitly pings accessibility in some of their code standards. And if we look at some of their code standards, it's kind of ugly code. Lots of spaces, Yoda conditions, all sorts of weird bits and pieces about how you do casing. Then also they have some holy walls, use tabs, not spaces, and they explicitly ping this is to add the most flexibility across clients. And this is the other one which always picks up. Arrays must be declared using long array syntax. And the reasoning is it makes it more readable for people with vision difficulties and much more descriptive for beginners. got to think, who does WordPress support? Obviously, they support experienced developers. Automatic is a pretty massive company. It has a lot of developers, not all of which are PHP developers. It has to support them in their code base, so they have these rules for all of the core code, and these are rules that are designed to make the code more accessible. PHP 4 developers, there are people who are still running WordPress that they haven't updated their skills, but they've still got to be able to access the code base. The code still needs to be accessible to them. Junior developers, people who are pretty fresh and new, so might just be starting in an agency, and if you've ever worked in an agency, they're going to be touching a lot of WordPress. International developers, so this is another big one. People who do not speak English as a first language. There's a lot of people who have to be covered by this. So that's someone else who they have to try and make their code base accessible for. Non-developers. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting. Whose first experience with programming was WordPress? How many people needed to or wanted to get a website up and could download this free software, and through the power of FTP, they could create a website? And then they wanted to do something on the website, and they found a forum post that said, add this to your functions.php. And that's how they started learning how to write. They're not developers, but they still need to be able to read and access the code. Small business owners, lots of small business owners that know nothing about software but are making changes to their code in WordPress because they need to. Your parents are probably, I don't know about you, but my father is in his mid-70s and has a WordPress site, which he hacks on occasionally. Basically, WordPress has to support the entire world. And that's why they have gone out of their way to make explicit guidelines for how to write their code. So the next thing isn't accessibility about disabilities? Because I've mentioned, international people and people who, international developers and people who aren't developers. What even is a disability? I mean, clearly we all know what a disability is, but just in case, so this video is going out later, so just for everyone else. State of being disabled, deprivation of want or ability, basically don't have the power to do something. It's a disadvantage or a handicap. The root is from dis, as in not, the reverse of, and ability, which is the capacity or power to do something. So obviously people know blindness, low vision, that's probably one of the big ones that comes to mind when you start talking about software and accessibility and disability. Blindness and low vision are not the same thing, and quite often people who are legally blind can actually still see a little bit. But yeah, you've got blindness, low vision. You've got color blindness is the other really big one that people start picking up on. So these are very, very clearly disabilities. We can all agree on this. Deafness and auditory impairment, that's 100%. We all know that's a disability. Paralysis, motor impairment, that type of stuff. Once again, I think everyone here is on board that that's disability. People who have lost a limb or a finger or a digit, all sorts of things. People who have lost part of their body or were perhaps born without all of the parts that that are considered standard. Those that I think everyone, once again, you'll agree that that's a disability. Neurodivergence is a really big one. So this is your ADHD, autism, a whole slew of things. It's basically a kind of catch-all term. It's a little bit controversial in itself, but It's more or less a catch-all term for, hey, not everyone's brains work the same way. I got diagnosed with ADHD a year or so ago, never realized it, and it's made a lot more things make sense now that I know. English as a second language is when you have to interact with an English speaking code base or an English written code base is technically a disability. They are less able to interact with or understand the meaning of the code if they do not speak the language. And I've had this in reverse. I've picked up code bases within the last couple of years that were originally written in Spanish. And it was a lot of time spent on Google Translate to just try and understand what in the heck this thing was trying to do. So yeah, in that case, using that code base, I had less ability than the people who wrote it originally. Junior developers, they are... they are less able. Does anyone disagree with this statement? That's the thing. Disabilities might be temporary. Not every disability is with you for your entire life. If you're a junior, you will get better, you will understand more. You might learn to speak English because that's what most software seems to be written in. But it also goes the other way. I know a few people who have lost their vision later in life and they're still writing code. But they weren't born blind. They are now. They can also... I've lost my vision temporarily when I had an eye infection. I've injured my wrist and lost use of my hand. It's possible to be temporarily disabled, and in those situations you still need to do your job, and it makes it quite difficult to do your job if you're just being pretty laissez-faire about your code and everything's in a mess. So a few days ago, Michael posted this on Twitter, and I think it's a really, really important statement. It's a really... very, very profound thing Michael said. But I think this comes down to the core of it. Accessibility is about having empathy for other people. And sometimes the best way to have that empathy is to, walk a mile in their shoes or write some code with a screen reader. So this is a pretty ugly chunk of code written to the WordPress coding standard. And now, if everything works and I can remember what buttons do anything, so this one. So now I have this chunk of code and I have, come on, do I have audio coming through? So come on, are you running NVDA? This really ruins this part of the talk if I can't get audio playing. Anything from up there? Oh, I've got something. So in the meantime, how's it going? Yep. Right now I'm having issues accessing the system. Is audio only through that?
Yeah. You play it locally?
Maybe.
Yeah, we'll do that. Sorry, guys.
Alrighty, I'll see if I can switch audio devices. This is what happens when they assume everyone's on a Mac. Okay, let's see. All right, let's see if this works.
Speech mode talk.
Okay, I have sound.
Email source.
Can we... Not quite sure how to...
Line pricing. wp-style.php-notepad. Text editor document blank.
All right, we hear that? Yeah. All right, so this is what this chunk of code sounds like to a screen reader.
Dollar total line price equals 0 semi. Dollar products equals array left paren, right paren, blank. For each left paren, dollar order dash greater line has dollar line item right paren, left brace. If left paren, product equals dollar line item dash greater type right paren, left. Dollar total line price equals dollar total line price plus dollar line item dash greater price semi. Dollar products left bracket right bracket equals dollar line item semi. Right brace else if left paren. Dollar total line price equals dollar total line price dash user equals great both running applications.
Oh, and so yeah, and this is the same, functionally same code written in a kind of more Laravel-ish way. Yes, I'll just turn this off for 1 sec.
Speech mode off.
So this is more or less the functionally equivalent chunk of code written in a more Laravel-ish way. And I will switch back over where I have it, the same chunk of code ready to play. So,
speech mode talk.
Can we still hear it? I'm not sure. Yeah.
Dollar total line price equals dollar order dash greater lines dash greater reduce left paren, fn left paren, dollar carry, dollar item right paren, equals greater dollar carry plus match left paren, dollar item dash greater type right paren, left brace.
There's a lot there. Not particularly clear what it's doing, but...
Equals greater dollar item dash greater price. Discount equals greater dash dollar item dash greater price.
Wait a second. That one's...
Product equals greater dollar item dash greater price. Discount equals greater dash dollar item dash greater price.
Where'd the negative go?
Default equals greater 0. Right brace, 0 right paren, semi.
Then
blank. Dollar products equals dollar
you come down and you go, okay, well,
product right paren.
Maybe if you scrub through, you can get to the... If you know that maybe that sounds weird, you'll...
Dash, dollar, dash, dollar, dash.
Yep, there you go. There's a dash. There's a negative in there.
Throw lot blank. If left paren, max left paren.
Yeah. Oh.
If left paren, max left paren, 0, dollar total line price right paren, left brace.
We've missed the not in there as well. So...
If left paren, max left paren, 0, dollar total line price right paren, left brace.
If this is the only way I was accessing this code, I wouldn't really be able to understand it very well. I would miss bits unless I explicitly scrubbed through. Bang, there we go.
Left paren.
And that's the thing. The WordPress code style, ugly as it may be, there was nothing in there that wasn't understandable just by going line by line. Whereas when we've simplified it, it's become less accessible. It's become harder to understand. And not just screen readers. If you have a junior who looks at this, I don't know why reduce function exists. It should almost always be a for each, unless you're like really wanting to try to be fancy. Yay, more controversial takes. But seriously though, reduce is, even to experienced developers, it's relatively inaccessible because it's separating out this kind of, you pass in a variable which you don't update, but the next time the function runs, it's been updated with whatever you returned. And then somewhere right at the end, it's, oh yeah, by the way, it starts at this. Reduce is a terrible function. And you might be going, but you're playing this in WordPad. I use PHP Storm. Yeah, sorry about that.
Dollar total line price equals dollar order dash greater lines dash greater reduce left paren, fn left paren, dollar carry, dollar item right paren, equals greater dollar carry plus match left paren, dollar item dash greater type right paren, left brace.
And we'll just cut down to the problem lines.
Dollar item dash greater price.
Yeah.
Product equals greater dollar item discount equals greater dash dollar item dash greater price. Blank. Throw blank. If left paren. Max left paren. $0. Total line price right paren.
The thing
Right
is,
paren. Left brace.
out of the box, most of the screen readers don't understand code. You can make them understand code better than this is. This is more or less out of the box for NVDA, which is one of the 2 screen readers that JetBrains natively supports, the other one being JAWS, both of which only on Windows. Well, I can kill this now, because I think my point's being made a little bit. So yeah, it's not just about the code, vibe of it, process, it's Jira, it's GitHub, it's vibe. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to be, for no one who gets the castle references, I'm sorry if you're,
Okay, straight to the point.
yeah. So yeah, it's not just about the code, it's about processes as well. If your development process looks kind of like this, if your development process looks like this, you've got an inaccessible process. So it's not just the code, it's the whole thing, it's holistic. You have to consider the way code gets into your system, and are we creating friction in the wrong places? Are we trying to, make things super pretty, and instead of writing something that's, really elegant, you've just made something clever, which is hard to access for anyone who is not deeply aware of how the systems work? So yeah, let's have a quick run through of identifying some inaccessibility in your code base or in your system. Are there sections of your system controlled by an enlightened few? There's stuff that you always tell the juniors, don't touch that. That's Dave's job. Not only is this a bus factor issue for Dave, but that means that code isn't accessible to people who aren't Dave. Are you assigning tasks that play to people's strengths? Or are you just going, here's a big pool of developers, good on ya, we'll chuck it in there, whoever picks it up, doesn't matter whether they're good at this or not, I expect the same output. Do you know who all of your users are? Because there's a good chance you probably don't. There's probably a whole bunch of users who you haven't considered to be users because you don't notice them clicking on buttons in your system. Does your code contain in-jokes, local references, or cryptic code names? I used to work with a company in Texas who had all these references to the Aggies and the Longhorns, which was a university rivalry. And they hired a bunch of people who didn't live in Houston. And none of it made sense because they were functional descriptions based on some weird university rivalry. But the same description, depending on who wrote it originally, means the same thing. So if you want someone to go, oh, this function's going to be slow, and someone called it an Aggie function, and then somewhere else in the code base, one of those Longhorns go, yeah. It's not accessible. It's hard to understand the code, even for people who are able to see and experienced developers and speak the language. It's adding unnecessary inaccessibility to your system. Are you being responsible with your tool selection? If you say every single developer touching this code needs to use PHP Storm, what if they can't? What if they're in a situation where it's not a good... if you're dictating your tools to your developers and to your team and saying you must use this tool, you're taking away their ability to pick the tool that works for them and build a system that works for them. Are you dictating how your developers work? Are you saying it's strict 9 to 5 in the office, you have to be here? A lot of us don't work that way. And we produce a lot better code in, weird hours or when it fits, rather than in some kind of weird corporate schedule which exists for who knows why. Is your code elegant or is it clever? And clever code is kind of like the reduce function. You go, wow, it's less lines of code, and that means half the people can't understand what it's doing. You're being clever. And are you doing the same thing in multiple different ways? You find this with, you have the short helper function auth, you have the auth facade, you have access to the user through the request. And if in your code base you're using all of these different things, it makes it hard for people to understand what each one is doing and which one they should be using. So you have to start thinking about all these little bits and pieces and going, how can I make this experience better for people who aren't like me? And remember, meeting the standard is easy when there isn't one. So let's try to improve accessibility on the back end. I've been Sam, I've gone a little bit over time, not as bad as last time I gave this talk. And here's a pupper for Tim. And I don't know where Michael is.
Surprise on stage left.
Whoa!
Thanks, Sam. There were a few questions. Can you, number one, explain your shirt?
It's the means of production. It's PHP hammer and my sickle, or our sickle.
Is it not up to product owners to decide accessibility, because not everyone has big pockets for everything?
Here's the thing. All of these things you may have had a look at it and gone, oh, is that that's going to take more effort. It's not just about making it accessible for people who you can't ask, is this going to be better for you? All of this stuff improves developer experience across the board. It's not a costly thing to do things well. It's not like you've got to go through and rip out your entire code base and go, is this meeting the accessibility standard? Because there isn't one. But yeah, I don't think it's something that is costly. The only thing it costs is people's egos when they keep trying to write clever code to show how cool and smart they are, and no one else can read it, and they think that means they've won.
Good answer. And the last one before I get the Laravel team up here, what is the answer to regular expressions?
Dot star.
Thank you, Samuel.